Please excuse my messy house. I will be cleaning it after I have done this video. I've been putting this video off for a long time because it has a lot of strong feelings in it, but I do think it is important to my mythos. So, today I'm going to be talking about police, which often is a subject I have to avoid with a lot of people that I care about because either they're related to somebody or it makes them viscerally uncomfortable the way that I talk about police. And I have to say that when it comes to hating or genuinely disliking a group of people, quite often that comes from a place of fear or a place of ignorance. Like, for example, racist people are usually fearful or genuinely ignorant about the people that they fear and hate. And I won't say that I hate police officers, but law enforcement and I have a long, rich history that is very complicated and is generally negative. So I grew up in the United States, in Texas, in the late 70s, early 80s, up till the 90s. And when I was a child, I was surrounded by crime. In the U.S., petty crime is regular, especially if you're poor, because the system is absolutely broken. The only way for poor people to succeed and often thrive is quite often to get in with, it is a macrocosm of how it is in prisons, where if you want to survive, you can't be by yourself. So quite often there are little individual groups, gangs, if you want to, talk about that, or organized crime stuff. And I'll talk about that briefly in a minute. But let's talk about my very beginnings of my relationship with police. So as a child, I was taught by my mother that policemen were superheroes. Policemen were the best people. The hardest working. They kept us all safe. As a child, I was taught to if something was wrong, find a police officer. And boy, was that interesting. So I had a desperate love / desire to be friendly with police. And this was shattered when I was about 5 years old. Because my mother had been drinking at a party and she backed into a telephone pole. And she damaged the telephone pole and she damaged the truck. And she damaged me because I was not adequately buckled in, which meant that my face hit the dashboard. It broke my 5-year-old nose and I bled from my face. And before the police got there, my mother told me to lie to them. Now, again, I was 5, and I thought that police were superheroes. So the fact that my mom was asking me to lie to them was hard. If I hadn't already been crying, I would be crying. But the only person who is more magical and more I was respected more and who I loved more was my mother. My dear, sweet mom, who had, we had the most codependent relationship, even when I was 5. So when she told me to lie to police, I did. And it became my fault that she was in such a hurry that she didn't see the telephone pole and backed into it because I was giving her trouble while she was trying to drive. So that was kind of the first thing that fucked with me about police, was that I was supposed to lie to them at certain points. Shortly after that, my mom got involved with a man. His name was, well, I'm not going to say what his name was because that's stupid. He's long dead, and he, in many ways, I'm partially responsible for his death. Other people almost more so. His family, his employees, my mother, his mother. But I definitely share some of the blame for his death. Um, and he was, in addition to being a upstanding pillar of his community, a deacon in his church, he was also a bookie for the local numbers racket, a additional mafia, a white people mafia, who ran numbers and drugs. I don't think they did prostitution, but I wouldn't be surprised. And so my second run-in with law enforcement was my stepdad's customers. Because the sheriff of our little town and all of his deputies were always making bets on local football games, national football games, anything and everything they could make bets on, they did. And so my second experience was this group of men who were purported to represent the law, but when I would see them, they were sweatily betting on football games. So that kind of hit me a little bit. The neighborhood I lived in was very poor. There was all numbers of crime when I was growing up there. Theft, drugs, shooting, violence, all that sort of stuff. And then organized crime moved in at the end of the street, and suddenly all of that stopped. Just completely stopped. Except for drugs. Drug deals increased like 3 or 4 or 5%. But I should say 3 or 4 or 5 times. Sorry. They dramatically increased the amount of drugs. But no longer were there shots in the night. No longer would people steal the air conditioner out of your window. All of that stopped. Nobody would break your stuff. There was no vandalism anymore. Organized crime had done what regular police visits could not. When I was small, I didn't know that I was working for organized crime when I was dropping off packages, but they would give me, $20 to drop off a package at a house, and I'd ride my bike over to the house and drop it off and stuff like that. And I was a kid. $20 is a lot of money when you're a kid, especially in the 80s. So my experience with that was basically just doing that. As I grew older, I became more aware of how crime worked, and I became more aware that in the area that I lived in, the police were just another gang. Most of the police that I knew were bullies. As a matter of fact, I would say every policeman I got to know was absolutely a bully. Occasionally they were good-hearted bullies who would just kind of mess with you, but a lot of them were more than that. Before I went off to live with Romany for 2 summers and do criminal stuff, I had already experienced police trying to assault me and my friends. I had already known girls who had been assaulted by police officers and forced to do horrible things. Underage girls. And I already knew that you could not trust the police officers in my area if you had any money, if you were attractive, any of that. Because the area I lived in was very poor, and therefore it was always a us versus them sort of situation. And if a judge were listening to somebody, it would be the police officers, not the war people. Then I went off and I was a criminal for a couple of summers. My mom and my sister were not talking at the time, and I used that to my advantage to not have to report in to anybody. So I just kind of disappeared off the map for weeks, if not months at a time. And had any number of adventures, but experienced more corrupt police officers. Shortly thereafter, I began working in hotels. And hotels gave me a vivid snapshot of the kind of people who were police officers. Because quite often we would have people who were under assumed names, who were the spouses, the abused spouses of police officers, who would be staying in the hotel under a fake name. And sometimes they would leave their real name at the front desk just in case. But more often than not, the abuser police officers would send a younger, often female police officer to go find their wife at local hotels. And once that person was found, they would find out what room they were in. And then the abuser police officer would go up, bully their way into the room, rip the phone out of the wall, threaten or physically abuse the spouse. And it wasn't always men. It was police officers of both genders who would dominate and bully spouses. And in my 18 years of working nights in hotels, I think probably about 30 times this happened. And the town I lived in was not a big town. It wasn't a small town, but it wasn't fucking Houston. It was maybe 70,000 people in one area, 60,000 in the other. So not more than 150,000 people in the town, but 30 times in 18 years we would have abused spouses staying at our hotel, and their abuser would... it got to where I was smart enough that I would train all my people to not give out names to anybody. And that if somebody demanded a name, they would call me, and I would check out their credentials, and I would make sure that it was okay. Because we had too many times when the police officers would send somebody young or sweet or, a lady, and my front desk people would be charmed, and they would be like, okay, well, since it's you. And that happened a lot. And I've talked about this before when I was talking about gun control with people. But the reason that we can't take guns from domestic abusers in the U.S., the reason we can't use red flag laws, because the people most likely to murder anyone in the U.S., statistically, the group most statistically linked to future murder is domestic abusers, of which American police officers are 40% self-reporting. That means 4 out of 10, 2 out of 5 American police officers admit that they abuse their spouse. Now, I am certain that there are people who go into policing and their intention is to change things. Their intention is to be good. Their intention is to protect. But that can't last. I'm still not done. I'll be talking about being a teacher and my experience as a teacher with police. And then I'll talk about my experience with Swedish police. But let me talk some facts real quick. So in the U.S., sometimes police officers have a mere 6 weeks of training in which they're supposed to learn all the laws. They're supposed to be able to qualify with a firearm. They're supposed to learn, how to de-escalate. They're supposed to learn everything you need to learn as a police officer, sometimes in as little as 6 weeks. Swedish, the standard is years. There's no psychological evaluation for American police, whereas that is required across the board. Whereas in Sweden, absolutely, multiple psych evals before they put people out there with the power of state-supported violence. In the U.S., most police forces, and especially police unions, are descended from slave hunters and have their powers still from that time period. In the past, when Americans tried to rise up for workers' rights, police were used along with military to subdue workers, and the property of the rich was worth more than the lives of the poor. dramatically more. And that's why America doesn't have the union protections that Sweden does. Because we tried to rise up, and they machine gun us back down. But that's pretty fucked. I had further experience with police, and this is where it starts. I had friends who became police officers, and I wanted to give them a shot. I wanted to say, okay, maybe I'm wrong. I need to test this experience that I've had, because I was biased. I grew up poor. Poor people mistrust police. I knew a bunch of people who use drugs recreationally. That makes sense that I would mistrust police. My mom was constantly drunk. That makes sense that I would mistrust police, because she was always lying to them. My stepdad was a criminal, and even though he also did bail bonds on the side, he actively was involved in criminal enterprises. It makes sense that I would mistrust police. So when my friends became police officers, I tried to give police a second shot. I tried to go, okay, I'll do a ride-along. Okay, I'll talk to these people. Okay, I'll meet with these people. We'll go to a Super Bowl party together. Okay, I'll meet with these people at a bar or whatever. And the people that I met were some of the dumbest, most poorly educated, most poorly self-controlled people that I have ever met. And there were rare people of intelligence, but most of the ones I met who were intelligent were fucking sociopaths who loved hurting people and loved putting other people under their power. Even the best police officers that I knew in the U.S. were bullies. Some of the people I knew who got recruited right out of high school, because that's the thing. You can become a police officer immediately after leaving high school. You can join the police academy, and almost within a couple of months of graduating high school, you can be a cop. Which is not the kind of people you want carrying deadly weapons and being representatives of the government. And this was before the ICE shit got really, really bad. But that's the way it is. So anyway, that is the reason that we can't do common sense gun control and red flag laws in the U.S. is because we would be deplatforming our police. We would be taking guns away from police officers. And apparently that's a bad thing, according to a lot of people. Then I went on, and the thing is, my experience with my friends who were cops, the good ones didn't get to stay cops. The good ones were unable to stay cops because everybody around them was so corrupt that they either had to go along with the corruption or they had to quit. I knew a couple of people who quit. I knew a couple of people who went along with the corruption, and we stopped being friends. But I was unable to stay friends with people who were staying cops. And I was unable to... I understood, but at the same time... And the thing is, it's not all police. It is also like several law enforcement organizations. I'm certain there are wings of police, and maybe areas of the country of police, where the most ignorant are not in charge. But where I lived, there was a significant number of black and Hispanic people, and almost every police officer I ever met was racist. Almost every single one. Almost every single police officer I met was sexist. Almost every single one. And the method in which they train police officers in the U.S. currently, still, to this day, is something called killology. And it is the idea that police officers, and this, they go around and they have, after your 6 weeks of training, they go around and they meet with the guy who says, every time you pull somebody over, you could die. I want you to have that in the back of your mind at all times, that they can kill you. That you are in constant danger. And you should always approach every single time you stop someone, you should be prepared to die. Because fear is definitely what you want in the hands of the guy who has guns. Especially when you don't. Because if he imagines that your cell phone is a gun. And again, this is what they teach them. This is part of the teaching program in America. The people who go from state to state, teaching police officers how to be police officers. Teach them, be afraid of death at all times, because if you're not fast enough, they will murder you. This is not a good place to start. It's not. Then I became a teacher. And the town I moved to was a little tiny town called Crockett. And there were a lot of shitty cops there. Crockett was a very poor town. And I did not know many of the current police officers. But the school employed a former police chief, who everybody just called Chief. And he was a piece of fucking work. He taught ethics, which, when I say former police chief, you may not get the idea of why he wasn't a police chief anymore. He wasn't a police chief anymore because he fraudulently signed up under his son's name for 12 credit cards. And he resigned because they had a bunch of other stuff on him, and he didn't want it to get too loud. So he started working at the school. Now, at the school, because he was a former police chief and everybody called him chief, everybody thought he still had police powers. So when he would occasionally order students to strip search, and this happened regularly, then they believed that he had the power to make them do that. As far as I know, he wasn't the perverted kind of corrupt cop. So I don't believe he strip searched female students. But I know of at least half a dozen male students who he got down to their underwear looking for drugs, which he was not allowed to fucking do as a teacher. He also threatened students. He also physically dominated students, bullied students, and told students ridiculous lies. Like, in their ethics class, somehow it came up that AIDS was a thing that had happened recently. And he said, yeah, AIDS appears when two men fuck. It appears magically when two men fuck. And students came to me in my math class. This wasn't even when I was teaching English. And they were like, hey, we just heard this from a cop. Is this true? And I was like, no. I'm sorry that the cop told you that. But despite this one terrible example of police officers, I also had something called resource officers in the U.S. And every school I worked at had them. I'm pretty sure every school in the U.S., at least public schools, has what's called a resource officer. That's a police officer inside the school. And those police officers who are inside the school escalate everything and make everything worse. If a student is mouthing off, a teacher can talk to that student. If a student starts being violent, most of the time we just put them out of the classroom and they just leave. But whenever there's resource officers, they're going to take every single fucking chance they can to throw a student to the ground, to slam a student to the ground, to put a student in handcuffs. And I'm not kidding. You can look up, if you want, if that's your thing, look up resource officer attack or resource officer slam or whatever. And there's plenty of examples on the internet of videos of people just talking back and then getting hurt. These are children. And these guys are not only happy to assault. Not only that, the normal thing, and this is the part that is most frustrating to me, is that every school I work at, they would assign a very young resource officer. And as I mentioned, you could be right out of school and become a police officer. So these guys are still flirting with the 15-year-old girls and are abusing the 15-year-old boys to look cool in front of the 15-year-old girls. It was disgusting. It was frustrating. It was horrific. Because they're hitting on children and bullying children so that they can more effectively hit on children. Now, I don't believe that Swedish police are like this. I believe that Swedish police are not only better trained, they're better restrained by the fact that in Sweden a lot of people are just less shitty than the worst people in America. I think that in the US, a lot of people, when they realize that being shitty gets you somewhere, they just lean into it. And that's not really the case here in Sweden, because being shitty doesn't give you the advantages in Sweden that it does in the US. But I have met police officers in Sweden. And I still haven't met one that wasn't a bully. That did not like throwing their weight around. That did not like shoving somebody out of the way. I've worked at schools where police officers have come by, and they often in Sweden are the exact same kind of people. Better shape, better trained, much more in control of their emotions. But I have only met maybe a dozen Swedish police officers. And every single one of them was a bully. Sometimes they were bullying me. Sometimes they were bullying students. Sometimes they were bullying people that I didn't know what they'd done wrong, but they didn't look like ethnic Swedes. And everybody says, because I come from America, everything becomes racist. Maybe I'm seeing something that wasn't there. Maybe the people had done something wrong and I hadn't seen it, and I was mistaken. But I have seen a significant policing of certain ethnic groups while working in Malmo and while working in Helsingborg and while working in Lund. So, I don't know for sure, but I know maybe. And the other thing is that I know, and eventually it is possible I will know enough Swedish police that I can disprove this. It's possible. I don't know. Probably not, though, because in general I don't get along with police officers. Because it feels like their job is the opposite of being a teacher. Because being a teacher, we're supposed to be open to the fact that we're wrong. We're supposed to be open to the fact that the students are not inherently bad, criminal, whatever. And we're supposed to always be ready to give them second chances. And even the normal Swedes that I know, who I'm certain commit crimes regularly, there is this weird thing, this weird tee-hee Swedish thing where they commit crimes, and they're like, well, it's only a crime if you don't get caught. Like falsifying things with their taxes, or crossing streets that are dangerous, or breaking, not following traffic laws, or whatever. And they're very tee-hee about it. Because, if they get caught, they're mostly good sports, and they're like, I guess you got me. I don't know why they're German now. But anyway, it's one of those things where even the Swedes that I know have done crimes still don't still say, yeah, the police can do whatever they want in Sweden. So eventually I'm going to find somebody who is a police whisperer here in Sweden who will tell me my rights, because I don't want to spit at a cop, but I want to know what they can do to me if I do. I don't want to curse out a cop, but I want to know what they can legally do to me if I don't think that I need to be an anarchist in Sweden. In the U.S., it is moral to stand up to cops. In the U.S., it is moral to stand up to ICE because they are so corrupt that standing up to them probably means you're in the right. It probably does. And I don't believe that's the case in Sweden. But I need to know, because if Sweden keeps going in the fascist direction that it wants to, if we keep electing SD and moderates and Christian Democrats, if we keep electing those fuckers, then who knows where we're going to be 5-10 years down the road. And I plan to stick around. So I need to know what my rights are when it comes to police, because police have the potential for abuse. And it has been my experience, my very limited experience in my 47 years, it has been my limited experience that people who have the power to abuse do. Often. Generally, if they have a power to abuse, especially if they have a monopoly on violence, then they're going to. So I need to find out. But I have my reasons for not trusting police. I don't believe they're all evil. I don't believe they're all inherently corrupt. But in the extreme amount of, and I've had a lot of interactions with police, I have my reasons. And they're not nothing. So I hope that this makes things make a little more sense to you, if you are interested in this. If you're not, I don't know why you're here, especially at the end. But, yeah. I have had a complicated relationship with police, and I'm still quite nervous when dealing with them. Because in Sweden, they're much less likely to abuse you, but as I understand, they still have that power, and that makes me uncomfortable. Hope you guys have better situations with police. And again, I'm not saying that there are no good ones. I'm not saying that it is impossible for them to be good. I'm talking specifically based on my information, which is limited. My experience, which is limited. But it is going to take more than... I'm going to need some serious statistics to break me out of the idea that police are bullies. I'm going to need some serious statistics to believe that the cops are not, in some way at least, a bit racist. Or that they're not liking throwing their weight around. Or that they're not occasionally abusive to people that they feel aren't respecting them enough. I'm going to need to see some stats. I'm going to need to see it. Sorry. Thanks. Hope you guys have a good day.